The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of St. Mary's General Hospital as Dr. Sarah Chen finished her third cup of coffee. It had been another sleepless night in the emergency department, and she was looking forward to her shift ending in 2 hours. The usual stream of patients had kept her busy since midnight, nothing too unusual for a Tuesday morning in downtown London. Nurse Rebecca Martinez was updating patient charts when she heard the commotion outside. Through the large glass doors of the emergency entrance, she could see people gathering on the street, their phones raised, taking pictures and videos. At first she thought it might be another celebrity arriving for treatment, something that happened occasionally at their hospital. But then she saw him. A man in full ceremonial palace guard uniform was walking steadily toward the hospital entrance. His red tunic was immaculate, his black bearskin hat perfectly positioned, and his polished boots clicked against the pavement with military precision. In his arms, he carried a young girl who appeared to be unconscious. Her small frame was dwarfed by his large protective embrace, and her head rested against his chest as if she were simply sleeping. The crowd outside grew larger as more people noticed the unusual sight. Some laughed, thinking it was some kind of publicity stunt or street performance. Others whispered among themselves, wondering if this was real or staged. Car horns honked as drivers slowed down to get a better look at the spectacle unfolding before the hospital. Dr. Chen looked up from her paperwork as the automatic doors slid open. She had seen many things during her 15 years in emergency medicine, but nothing quite like this. The palace guard stood at the entrance, his face stern and focused, showing no acknowledgement of the growing crowd behind him or the surprised stares from hospital staff and visitors. "I need help," he said in a clear, authoritative voice that carried the weight of urgency despite his calm demeanor. "This child requires immediate medical attention." Rebecca dropped her clipboard and rushed toward them, her nursing instincts kicking in immediately. She could see that the girl, who appeared to be around 8 years old, was breathing but unresponsive. Her skin had a pale grayish tint, and there were no obvious signs of external injury. "What happened to her?" Dr. Chen asked as she quickly approached, already putting on her gloves and calling for a gurney. The palace guard's eyes never left the child's face as he spoke. "I found her collapsed outside Buckingham Palace, approximately 20 minutes ago. She was alone, unconscious, with no identification. I believe she may have been there for some time before I discovered her." Dr. Chen nodded, her mind already racing through possible diagnoses. Dehydration, hypoglycemia, seizure disorder, or perhaps something more serious. The fact that the child had been found alone outside the palace raised additional concerns about her circumstances and how she had ended up there. "Please place her on the gurney," Rebecca instructed, wheeling the bed closer to the guard. As he gently transferred the girl, his movements were careful and protective, like a father handling his own child. Despite his imposing appearance and formal uniform, there was an unmistakable tenderness in the way he ensured she was comfortable on the hospital bed. The small crowd that had gathered inside the hospital entrance watched in fascination. Some visitors pulled out their phones to record the scene, while others simply stared in amazement. It wasn't every day that a palace guard in full ceremonial dress walked into their local hospital carrying an unconscious child. "Sir, I need you to step aside now so we can examine her," Dr. Chen said professionally, though she couldn't help but be curious about the guard's story. He hesitated for a moment, looking down at the girl with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Will she be all right, doctor? We're going to do everything we can for her. What's your name and how can we contact you if we need more information?" "Guard Thomas Wellington," he replied, standing at attention despite the unusual circumstances. "I'm stationed at Buckingham Palace. I can provide my contact information, but I would like to stay until I know she's going to be okay." Dr. Chen found his dedication touching but knew she needed to focus on her patient. "We'll take good care of her, Guard Wellington. The waiting area's just over there if you'd like to stay." As they wheeled the girl toward the treatment rooms, Thomas Wellington remained standing at the entrance for several moments, watching until she disappeared from view. The crowd outside had grown even larger, with local news crews beginning to arrive after social media posts about the unusual scene started going viral. Rebecca returned to the entrance to speak with him. "Guard Wellington, Can you tell me anything else about how you found her? Was there anyone else around? Did you see how she got there? Thomas removed his bearskin hat and held it under his arm, his brown hair slightly disheveled from the morning's events. I was beginning my shift at the palace gates when I noticed her lying on the ground near the Victoria Memorial. At first I thought she might be sleeping, but when I approached I realized she was unconscious and unresponsive. Did you call for an ambulance? I tried, but the estimated arrival time was 25 minutes due to traffic. The child's condition appeared serious, and I decided that bringing her here myself would be faster. His matter-of-fact tone suggested this was simply the logical decision to make under the circumstances. Rebecca nodded, impressed by his quick thinking and decisive action. You did the right thing. 25 minutes could have made a significant difference for her. As Thomas made his way to the waiting area, still in his full ceremonial uniform, other patients and visitors couldn't help but stare. Some approached him with questions. Others simply took pictures from a distance. Through the large windows, the crowd outside continued to grow, with reporters setting up cameras and interviewing witnesses about what they had seen. Inside the treatment room, Dr. Chen and her team worked quickly to assess the girl's condition. Her vital signs were stable but weak. An initial test would be needed to determine what had caused her collapse. As they worked, none of them could have predicted that this mysterious child would soon reveal a story that would change several lives forever, including that of the devoted palace guard who had refused to leave her side. 2 hours passed before Dr. Chen emerged from the treatment room with an update. She found Thomas Wellington exactly where he had been when she last saw him, sitting rigidly upright in the waiting area chair, his ceremonial uniform still pristine, despite the morning's events. His bearskin hat rested on the chair beside him, and his eyes were fixed on the treatment room doors. Several reporters had managed to enter the hospital lobby, trying to get interviews and photographs. Hospital security was working to keep them at a respectful distance, but the story was already spreading across social media platforms. Videos of the palace guard carrying the unconscious child had been viewed thousands of times, with speculation running wild about who the girl was and what had happened to her. Guard Wellington, Dr. Chen called softly as she approached him. He immediately stood at attention, his military training evident in every movement. How is she, doctor? She's stable now. We've managed to get her conscious and responsive, though she's still quite weak. Her blood sugar levels were dangerously low, and she was severely dehydrated. It appears she hadn't eaten or had proper fluids for at least 2 days, possibly longer. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him, though his expression remained controlled. Is she going to recover fully? With proper nutrition and care, yes. However, we have a more complicated situation. The child says her name is Emma, and she's 9 years old, not 8 as we initially thought. But here's what's concerning us. She claims she doesn't remember anything about her family or how she ended up at the palace. Dr. Chen paused, studying Thomas's reaction. She does remember one thing clearly, though. She remembers you finding her and carrying her here. She's been asking for the nice soldier man who helped her. Thomas's stern facade cracked slightly, showing the genuine concern he felt. Does she have any identification? Family members we can contact? Nothing. No identification, no family contacts, no missing person reports that match her description. Social services is on their way, but in the meantime, she's asking to see you. I know this is unusual, but she seems to feel safe with you, and that's important for her emotional state right now. Without hesitation, Thomas nodded. Of course, if it will help her. Dr. Chen led him through the hospital corridors toward the pediatric ward. As they walked, she explained more about Emma's condition. Physically, aside from the malnutrition and dehydration, she appears to be healthy. No signs of abuse or recent injury. However, her memory loss is puzzling. It could be psychological trauma, or it could be related to her physical condition. Sometimes severe hypoglycemia can affect memory. They stopped outside room 314. Through the small window in the door, Thomas could see Emma sitting up in bed, looking small and fragile in the hospital gown. Her dark hair had been brushed and pulled back, and there was more color in her cheeks than when he had found her. Emma, Dr. Chen said gently as they entered the room. "I brought someone to see you." Emma's face lit up immediately when she saw Thomas, though he was still in his full ceremonial uniform. "You came back," she said softly, her voice still weak, but filled with relief. Thomas approached her bedside, unsure of the appropriate protocol for this situation. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but comforting a lost child was not among them. "How are you feeling, Emma?" "Better, thank you. The doctor says you saved my life." Her large brown eyes looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and something else, a connection that surprised them both. "I just did what anyone would have done," Thomas replied, though Dr. Chen had already told him that many people might have simply called for help and waited rather than taking action themselves. Emma reached out and touched the golden buttons on his red tunic. "Are you a real palace guard, like in the movies?" Despite the serious situation, Thomas found himself almost smiling. "Yes, I guard Buckingham Palace. It's my job to protect the royal family and the palace grounds." "Is that why you protected me too?" The simple question caught Thomas off guard. In his years of service, his duty had always been clear and defined: protecting the monarchy, following orders, maintaining discipline and tradition. But something about this child's situation had activated a different kind of protective instinct, one that went beyond his official duties. "I suppose it is," he answered truthfully. Dr. Chen watched the interaction with interest. As a physician, she had seen many patients and their families, but there was something uniquely touching about the bond that seemed to be forming between this stoic palace guard and the mysterious child. A knock on the door interrupted them. A woman in her 50s entered, wearing a professional suit and carrying a briefcase. "I'm Sandra Mills from Social Services," she announced, though her tone was kind rather than bureaucratic. Thomas immediately stood and moved aside, allowing the social worker to approach Emma's bed. He watched as Emma's demeanor changed, becoming more reserved and cautious. "Hello, Emma," Sandra said gently. "I'm here to help figure out what happens next. Can you tell me anything about your family, your parents, where you live, anything at all?" Emma shook her head, looking frustrated with herself. "I try to remember, but it's all foggy, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up." Sandra nodded understandingly. "That's okay. Sometimes our minds need time to heal, just like our bodies. In the meantime, we need to find you a safe place to stay while we look for your family." "Can't I stay with him?" Emma asked, pointing to Thomas. "He found me. He takes care of people." The request was both innocent and complicated. Sandra looked between Emma and Thomas, clearly trying to navigate a delicate situation. "Emma, Guard Wellington has a very important job that keeps him very busy. We need to find you a place with people who can take care of children full-time." Thomas felt an unexpected pang of disappointment, though he knew the social worker was right. His schedule was demanding. His living quarters were not suitable for a child, and he had no experience caring for anyone, let alone a 9-year-old girl. But as he looked at Emma's face, which had fallen at Sandra's explanation, he found himself speaking before he had fully thought through the implications. "What if I were to visit her regularly, until her memory returns or her family is found?" The words surprised him as much as they surprised the others in the room. Sandra considered this. That might actually be beneficial. Sometimes having a consistent, familiar presence can help with memory recovery, especially in cases of psychological trauma. Emma's face brightened again. "Would you really visit me?" Thomas looked down at this child who had somehow managed to touch something in his heart that he hadn't known existed. His life had been structured, predictable, and solitary for so many years. But something about Emma's trust in him, her belief that he would protect her, made him want to be worthy of that faith. "I give you my word," he said solemnly, and Emma smiled for the first time since waking up. 3 days later, Thomas Wellington stood outside Sunshine Children's Home, a temporary care facility where Emma had been placed while social services searched for her family. He had changed out of his ceremonial uniform and wore civilian clothes, jeans and a simple blue sweater that made him look more approachable and less intimidating than his formal palace attire. The facility was a converted Victorian house with a large garden, painted in cheerful yellows and greens. Children's artwork decorated the windows, and he could hear laughter coming from the playground behind the building. It was a warm, welcoming place, but Thomas knew Emma was struggling to adjust. Mrs. Patricia Henley, the facility director, greeted him at the entrance. She was a motherly woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Guard Wellington, Emma has been asking about you every day. She's been quite withdrawn with the other children, but she lights up whenever we mention that you're coming to visit." Thomas felt both pleased and concerned. How is she settling in otherwise? "It's difficult," Mrs. Henley admitted as they walked through the cheerfully decorated hallways. "She's polite and well-behaved, but she keeps to herself. The other children have tried to include her in games and activities, but she seems more comfortable observing than participating. Dr. Chen says this is normal for her situation, but it's clear she's carrying a heavy emotional burden." They passed a common room where several children were playing board games and watching television. Emma sat alone in a corner chair, reading a book that looked too advanced for her age. She was dressed in clothes donated by local families, a pink sweater and dark pants that fit reasonably well but lacked the personal touch of a parent's careful selection. When Emma looked up and saw Thomas, her entire demeanor changed. She set down her book and walked quickly toward him, not quite running but moving with obvious excitement. "You came," she said, reaching up to hug him around the waist. Thomas was still getting used to physical affection, his military background, having taught him to maintain professional distance, but he found himself naturally returning the embrace. "I told you I would. How are you feeling today?" "Better. Mrs. Henley makes really good soup, and there's a library here with lots of books." Emma looked up at him hopefully. "Can we go to the garden? I want to show you the flowers I've been taking care of." Mrs. Henley nodded approvingly. She's been quite dedicated to helping with the garden. It seems to give her a sense of purpose. As they walked outside, Emma chattered more freely than she had since her memory loss began. She showed Thomas the small plot where she had been, helping to plant winter vegetables, and the bird feeder she had been keeping filled with seeds. "The birds were hungry just like I was when you found me," she explained matter-of-factly, "so I make sure they always have enough to eat." Thomas knelt down beside the garden bed, genuinely interested in her work. "You've done an excellent job. These plants look very healthy." Emma beamed at the praise. "Mrs. Henley says I have a natural gift for growing things. Maybe when I remember who I am, I'll remember if my family had a garden too." The mention of her missing family brought a shadow across her face. Thomas had been briefed by Sandra Mills about the search efforts. Despite extensive media coverage, database searches, and coordination with missing children organizations, no one had come forward claiming to know Emma. It was as if she had appeared from nowhere. "Emma, can I ask you something?" Thomas said gently. "When you try to remember your family, what do you feel? Happy? Sad? Scared?" Emma considered the question seriously. "It's strange. When I try really hard to remember, I get this feeling in my stomach like when you're about to get in trouble. But I don't know why. Dr. Chen says maybe my brain is protecting me from something that might hurt to remember." This revelation concerned Thomas. Could Emma's memory loss be protecting her from traumatic experiences? Had she run away from something dangerous? The fact that she had been found alone, malnourished, outside one of London's most recognizable landmarks suggested a story more complicated than simple confusion or getting lost. "Have you remembered anything new at all?" he asked. "Little things. I remember loving horses, and I think I used to live somewhere with a big kitchen that always smelled like bread baking. And I remember someone singing to me at bedtime, but I can't see their face or remember the words to the songs." Thomas filed away these details, hoping they might prove useful to the search efforts. Those are good memories to hold on to. They spent the next hour working together in the garden. Thomas found the repetitive nature of weeding and watering surprisingly relaxing, after years of standing at rigid attention for hours at a time. Emma worked beside him, comfortable in the silence between them, occasionally pointing out interesting insects or asking questions about his work at the palace. Do you live at Buckingham Palace? She asked as they replanted some seedlings. No, I have my own apartment not far from here. Palace guards live in regular homes, just like everyone else. We only work at the palace. Is it lonely, living by yourself? The question caught Thomas off guard. He had never really considered his solitary lifestyle as lonely, just practical and neat. But lately, since meeting Emma, he had begun to notice the silence in his apartment, the lack of conversation over meals, the absence of someone to share daily experiences with. Sometimes, he answered honestly. Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. I get lonely too, even with all the other children here. Mrs. Henley says it's because I don't remember my family, so part of me feels missing. As the afternoon progressed, other children from the facility joined them in the garden. Thomas watched Emma interact with them and noticed something important. While she remained somewhat reserved, she was naturally kind and helpful, sharing tools and showing a younger boy how to plant seeds properly. One of the older children, a boy named Marcus who appeared to be about 12, approached Thomas directly. Are you Emma's dad? He asked with the straightforward curiosity of childhood. No, I'm just a friend who's helping to take care of her while we look for her family. Marcus studied Thomas with serious eyes. She talks about you all the time. She says you're the bravest person she knows because you saved her life. Thomas felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. He looked over at Emma, who was carefully watering a row of lettuce seedlings, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. She's pretty brave herself, he replied, as visiting time came to an end. Emma walked with Thomas back to the main building. At the entrance, she looked up at him with an expression that seemed far too mature for her 9 years. Thomas, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think my family is looking for me? Or do you think maybe they can't find me because they don't want to? The question revealed the deeper fear that Emma had been carrying, one that went beyond simple memory loss. Thomas knelt down to her eye level, choosing his words carefully. Emma, I believe that anyone who had you as their daughter would move heaven and earth to find you. If your family isn't here yet, it's because something is preventing them from getting to you, not because they don't want you. Emma nodded, seeming to find comfort in his certainty. Will you keep coming to visit me, even if it takes a long time, to find them? Thomas looked into her trusting eyes and felt something shift permanently in his heart. This child had somehow become important to him in a way he had never expected. For as long as you need me to, he promised. 2 weeks into Emma's stay at Sunshine Children's Home, Thomas received an unexpected phone call during his morning shift at Buckingham Palace. Detective Inspector Margaret Foster from the Metropolitan Police was calling with news about Emma's case. Guard Wellington, we've had a development. A woman called our tip line yesterday claiming to recognize Emma from the news coverage. She says Emma might be her granddaughter who disappeared from a small town in Scotland 3 months ago. Thomas felt his heart race with a mixture of hope and unexpected anxiety. Is she certain? Has she provided any proof? She's provided some details that match Emma's description, and she's bringing photographs and documentation to London today. We'd like Emma to meet with her this afternoon to see if it triggers any memories. Would you be able to be present? Emma has expressed that she feels safer with you there. Of course, Thomas replied without hesitation. What do we know about the circumstances of her disappearance? Detective Foster's voice became more serious. According to the grandmother, Emma was living with her parents in a small village outside Edinburgh. 3 months ago, she simply vanished from her bedroom one night. Her parents searched everywhere, contacted police, but there were no signs. A forced entry, no witnesses, nothing. It was as if she had simply evaporated. And the parents, where are they now? There was a pause on the line. That's where the story gets complicated, Guard Wellington. According to the grandmother, Emma's parents died in a car accident 2 weeks after she disappeared. They were out searching for her when their car went off a mountain road during a storm. Thomas felt a chill run through him. If this woman was truly Emma's grandmother, it meant Emma was now an orphan, and the family she had been hoping to remember was gone forever. Does the grandmother know this? About Emma's memory loss? We've briefed her on Emma's condition. She's prepared for the possibility that Emma won't recognize her, but she's hopeful that seeing familiar family photographs might help restore some memories. That afternoon, Thomas arrived at Sunshine Children's Home to find Emma waiting for him in the main sitting room. She was dressed in her best outfit, a blue dress that Mrs. Henley had found in the donation closet, and her hair was neatly braided. Despite her composed appearance, Thomas could see the nervousness in her eyes. "Are you ready for this?" he asked gently, sitting beside her on the sofa. Emma nodded, though she reached for his hand. "What if I don't remember her? What if she's disappointed in me?" "Emma, if this woman is truly your family, she'll be so happy to have found you that nothing else will matter. And if she isn't your family, then we keep looking until we find the right people." Detective Foster arrived with a woman in her 70s who had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She moved slowly, using a walking cane, and her face showed the strain of recent grief and worry. When she saw Emma, her hand flew to her mouth and tears filled her eyes. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered. "You look so much like your mother did at your age." Emma studied the woman's face intently, as if trying to force her memory to cooperate. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember you. The doctors say I lost my memories when I got sick." The woman, who introduced herself as Rose Mackenzie, nodded understandingly. "That's all right, sweetheart. I brought some things that might help." She opened a small suitcase and pulled out a worn photo album. As Rose turned the pages showing pictures of a young couple with a dark-haired little girl, Emma leaned forward with growing interest. The photos showed birthday parties, family vacations, Christmas mornings, and quiet moments of everyday life. "This is you on your 7th birthday," Rose said, pointing to a picture of Emma blowing out candles on a cake. "You insisted on having a horse-themed party because you were obsessed with riding lessons." Emma's eyes widened. "I remember loving horses," she said quietly. "I told Thomas about that." Rose looked at Thomas with gratitude. "You must be the palace guard who found her. I can't thank you enough for what you did." As they continued through the photo album, Emma began to show signs of recognition. She pointed to a kitchen scene and said, "That looks like the place where I remember smelling bread baking." "Your mother baked fresh bread every morning," Rose confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It was your favorite thing about waking up." But when Rose showed Emma a picture of her parents, Emma's reaction was unexpected. Instead of joy or recognition, she pulled back with a look of confusion and something that resembled fear. "I feel strange looking at them," Emma admitted. "Like something bad happened, but I can't remember what." Rose and Detective Foster exchanged meaningful looks. Rose reached into her purse and pulled out a small stuffed horse worn from years of love and handling. "This is Mr. Gallop," she said softly. "He was your constant companion. You took him everywhere." Emma's reaction was immediate and emotional. She reached for the stuffed animal and clutched it to her chest, tears beginning to flow. "I remember him," she whispered. "I remember being scared and holding on to him tight." Thomas watched this emotional reunion with mixed feelings. He was happy that Emma was beginning to recover her memories and connect with her family, but he also felt a strange sense of loss, as if something precious was slipping away from him. Detective Foster gently guided the conversation toward Emma's disappearance. "Emma, can you remember anything about the night you left home? Did someone take you or did you leave on your own?" Emma held Mr. Gallop tighter and looked at Thomas as if seeking strength. "I remember being very scared. There was a lot of shouting and I heard something break. I took Mr. Gallop and ran outside because I didn't want to be there anymore." "Do you remember what the shouting was about?" Emma shook her head, but Rose spoke up quietly. Emma's parents were having serious problems in their marriage. They had been arguing constantly for months. James had started drinking heavily after losing his job, and Sarah was talking about taking Emma and leaving. I think Emma must have overheard one of their fights and gotten scared. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together. Emma, frightened by her parents fighting, had run away from home with only her stuffed horse for comfort. A 9-year-old child, alone and scared, had somehow made her way from Scotland to London, surviving on her own for months before collapsing from hunger and exhaustion outside Buckingham Palace. "How did you get to London, sweetheart?" Rose asked, gently, Emma closed her eyes, concentrating hard. I remember hiding on a big truck. It was cold and dark, but I stayed quiet. When it stopped, I was in a place with lots of cars and noise. I walked for a long time, asking people for food, sleeping in doorways. Thomas felt his heart break thinking of this small child, alone and frightened, surviving on the streets of London. How had she managed to stay safe for so long? How had no one noticed a 9-year-old living homeless? I kept walking until I saw the big palace, Emma continued. It looked like the castles in my storybooks. I thought maybe if I waited, someone would help me find my way home. But then I got too tired and sick to keep going. Rose reached over and took Emma's hand. Your parents searched everywhere for you, darling. They never stopped looking. They loved you so very much. Emma looked confused. Where are they now? Why didn't they come with you? The room fell silent. Rose looked at Detective Foster, who nodded encouragingly. Emma, I have something very sad to tell you, Rose began, her voice breaking. Your mommy and daddy were in an accident while they were looking for you. They went to heaven 2.5 months ago. Emma's face went through a range of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, devastating sadness. She looked at Thomas, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. They're gone? Forever? Thomas moved closer to Emma and put his arm around her shoulders. I'm so sorry, Emma. But you're not alone. You have your grandmother, Rose, and you have all of us who care about you. Emma buried her face against Thomas's chest and sobbed, grieving not just for her parents' death, but for the realization that her worst fear about her memory loss had been correct. Her mind had been protecting her from the knowledge that her family was broken, and now she learned they were gone entirely. Rose watched Thomas comfort Emma and saw something that surprised her. This reserved military man was holding her granddaughter with the tenderness of a loving parent, and Emma was seeking comfort from him as naturally as if he had always been part of her family. The weeks following Emma's reunion with her grandmother were emotionally challenging for everyone involved. Rose Mackenzie had made the difficult journey from Scotland to London multiple times, working with social services to establish legal guardianship and help Emma process the overwhelming news about her parents. Thomas continued his regular visits to Sunshine Children's Home, but the dynamic had changed. Emma was no longer the mysterious child with no past. She was a little girl grieving the loss of her parents while trying to build a relationship with a grandmother she barely remembered. She's having nightmares, Mrs. Henley confided in Thomas during one of his visits. She wakes up crying, calling for her parents, but when she's fully awake, she remembers they're gone and cries even harder. The only thing that seems to calm her down is when we tell her you're coming to visit. Thomas found Emma in the garden, sitting quietly by the bird feeder she had been maintaining. She was holding Mr. Gallop and watching the sparrows eat the seeds she had scattered. Her face was thinner than before, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. The birds depend on you now, Thomas observed, sitting down beside her on the wooden bench. Granny Rose says dependable people are the most important kind, Emma replied softly. She says my mummy was dependable, that she never missed reading me a bedtime story even when she was sad about Daddy's drinking. Thomas had learned more about Emma's family situation from Detective Foster. The investigation had revealed that James Mackenzie's alcoholism had worsened significantly after losing his job, leading to increasingly volatile arguments with his wife Sarah. The night Emma disappeared, neighbors had reported hearing a particularly loud altercation, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful person, Thomas said carefully. Emma nodded, then looked at him with the direct honesty that children possess. Thomas, do you think it's my fault they died? If I hadn't run away, they wouldn't have been out looking for me in the storm. The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. This child had been carrying guilt that no 9-year-old should ever bear. Emma, look at me, he said firmly. Your parents' accident was not your fault. You were a scared little girl who made the only choice you knew how to make. Your parents would never want you to blame yourself for what happened. But if I had been braver, if I had stayed and tried to help them stop fighting. Emma, it wasn't Your job to fix your parents' problems. Children should never have to carry that responsibility. Your parents loved you, and they would want you to be happy, not guilty. Emma leaned against Thomas's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her protectively. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the birds and listening to the sounds of other children playing in the distance. Granny Rose wants me to come live with her in Scotland, Emma said eventually. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared for how much the prospect of losing Emma affected him. How do you feel about that? She's very kind, and she has lots of pictures and stories about my mummy when she was little. Her house smells like lavender and has a big garden where I could plant vegetables. Emma paused, then looked up at Thomas with worried eyes. But Scotland is very far away from London. I wouldn't be able to see you anymore. Thomas felt his heart constrict. Over the past month, Emma had become the most important person in his life, though he had been careful not to let anyone see how deeply attached he had become. The thought of her moving hundreds of miles away left him feeling hollow. You'll make new friends in Scotland, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. And your grandmother needs you. You're all the family she has left. But you're my family too now, Emma said with the simple logic of a child. You saved my life and you kept your promise to visit me. That makes you family. Before Thomas could respond, Mrs. Henley appeared at the garden entrance. Emma, your grandmother is here to see you. She's in the main office with Sandra Mills. Emma stood up reluctantly, clutching Mr. Gallop. Will you come with me? I don't like the meetings where adults talk about my future without asking what I want. Thomas took her hand and walked with her to the administrative building. Through the office window he could see Rose Mackenzie sitting across from Sandra Mills, various documents spread across the desk between them. Rose looked tired and older than her years, the stress of the past months evident in her posture. Emma, dear, Rose said warmly when they entered. Come sit with me. We need to discuss some important things. Sandra Mills looked up at Thomas. Guard Wellington, I'm glad you're here. We've been discussing Emma's future and your name has come up quite a bit in our conversations. Thomas felt confused. In what context? Rose spoke up, her voice thoughtful. Emma talks about you constantly. In all our conversations, you're mentioned more than anyone else. It's clear that you've become a very important figure in her life. Mrs. Mackenzie has been considering all of Emma's options, Sandra continued. While she's certainly able and willing to provide a home for Emma in Scotland, she's also concerned about disrupting the support system Emma has built here in London. Emma looked between the adults, sensing that something significant was being discussed but not entirely understanding. What? Rose reached over and took Emma's hand. Sweetheart, I've been thinking about what would make you happiest. I'm 73 years old, and while I have a lot of love to give you, I also have to be realistic about my limitations. Thomas, may I speak frankly with you? Thomas nodded, though he felt apprehensive about where this conversation was heading. I've watched you with Emma over these past weeks. I see the way she lights up when you arrive, the way she seeks your approval and comfort. More importantly, I see the way you look at her. You love that little girl as if she were your own daughter. Thomas opened his mouth to protest, to maintain the professional distance he had been trained to keep, but Rose held up her hand. I also see the way you've changed since meeting her. Mrs. Henley tells me you've become more relaxed, more open. Emma has been good for you, just as you've been good for her. Sandra Mills leaned forward. Thomas, what Mrs. Mackenzie is suggesting is quite unusual but not unprecedented. She would like to know if you would consider becoming Emma's legal guardian, with her maintaining grandparental rights and regular contact. Thomas felt the room spin slightly. I don't understand. You want me to adopt Emma? Not adopt, initially, Rose clarified. Guardianship first with the possibility of adoption later if that's what everyone wants. I would move to London, find a small flat nearby so I could be part of Emma's daily life while you provide the primary home and stability she needs. Emma's eyes grew wide as she began to understand what was being proposed. Thomas, does that mean I could live with you? Really live with you like a real family? Thomas looked at Emma's hopeful face, then at Rose's encouraging smile, then at Sandra's professional but supportive expression. Everything in his organized, predictable life was telling him this was impossible. He had no experience raising children. His work schedule was demanding. His apartment was too small. He had never even considered becoming a parent. But as he looked at Emma, he realized that none of those practical concerns mattered. Somewhere over the past month, this brave little girl had become his daughter in every way that counted. The thought of her moving to Scotland, of losing the daily opportunity to see her grow and learn and heal, was unbearable. "Emma," he said carefully, "this would be a very big change for both of us. Are you sure this is what you want?" Emma nodded vigorously. "I want to live with you more than anything in the whole world. You make me feel safe, and you keep your promises, and you listen to me when I'm scared." Thomas looked at Rose. "Are you certain about this? Emma is your granddaughter, your last connection to your daughter." Rose smiled with tears in her eyes. "Thomas, my daughter would have wanted Emma to be with someone who loves her completely and unconditionally. I can see that person is you. I'm not losing my granddaughter. I'm gaining a son-in-law of sorts, and Emma is gaining the father figure she desperately needs." Sandra Mills pulled out a folder of documents. "This would require home studies, background checks, parenting classes, and a gradual transition period. It's not something that would happen overnight." "How long would the process take?" Thomas asked, his military mind already shifting into planning mode. "Approximately 6 months for full guardianship approval, assuming everything goes smoothly. During that time, Emma could have extended stays with you, weekend visits, and increasing overnight stays." Thomas looked down at Emma, who was holding his hand tightly and looking at him with complete trust. For the first time in his adult life, he was about to make a decision based entirely on his heart, rather than logic or duty. "Yes," he said quietly. "If Emma wants this, and if Mrs. Mackenzie is certain, then yes, I want to be Emma's guardian." Emma threw her arms around Thomas's waist, hugging him tightly. "Really? You really want me?" Thomas hugged her back, feeling tears he didn't know he was capable of shedding. "Emma, I can't imagine my life without you in it." Rose wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Sarah would be so happy to know Emma found someone who loves her this much. 6 months later, Thomas Wellington stood in the kitchen of his newly expanded apartment making breakfast while Emma sat at the table doing homework. The morning routine had become as natural as breathing, though he still sometimes marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The apartment that had once been a sparse, military-neat bachelor pad now showed signs of a 9-year-old's presence everywhere. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, her books filled a new bookshelf in the living room, and her school bag sat by the front door next to his perfectly polished guard boots. "Thomas, I can't remember how to do long division," Emma called, from the table, her pencil tapping against her math worksheet. "Let me finish these eggs and I'll help you," Thomas replied, sliding scrambled eggs onto 2 plates alongside toast and sliced fruit. The domestic scene would have been unimaginable to him a year ago, but now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Emma had legally become his ward 3 months earlier, after a thorough evaluation process that had tested every aspect of his ability to provide a stable, loving home. The social workers had been initially skeptical about a single man with no parenting experience taking on a traumatized child, but Emma's obvious happiness and Thomas's complete dedication had won them over. Rose Mackenzie had kept her promise to move to London, settling into a cozy flat just 10 minutes away. She visited regularly, sharing stories about Emma's mother and maintaining the connection to Emma's Scottish heritage. The arrangement worked beautifully, giving Emma the love of extended family while allowing Thomas to be her primary parent and emotional anchor. "The answer is 42, Emma announced proudly, having worked through the division problem while Thomas plated their breakfast. "Well done. You're getting much better at those." Thomas set her plate in front of her and sat down with his own breakfast. These morning meals together had become one of his favorite parts of the day, a quiet time before the busy schedules of school and work separated them. Emma had enrolled at a local primary school and was thriving academically and socially. Her memory had fully returned, though she still occasionally had nightmares about her parents' deaths. Dr. Chen, who had remained involved in Emma's care, said this was normal and would likely improve with time and continued stability. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" Emma said between bites of toast. "Always. At school, some kids ask me why my dad wears a funny hat to work." She giggled at this description of his ceremonial bearskin. "What should I tell them?" Thomas smiled. The question of how to explain their unusual family situation had come up several times. Emma was proud of his role as a palace guard and loved hearing stories about his work, but he knew it was sometimes difficult for her classmates to understand. "You can tell them that your dad has a very special job protecting the Queen's palace, and the hat is part of his uniform, just like police officers and firefighters have special uniforms. Can you come to school for career day next month?" Mrs. Peterson said parents can come talk about their jobs. "I want to show everyone how brave and important you are." Thomas felt the familiar warmth in his chest that Emma's pride in him always brought. "I'll speak to my commanding officer about arranging it. I think that would be wonderful." After breakfast, they walked to Emma's school together, a routine they both cherished. Emma chattered about her upcoming class play where she had been cast as a narrator, and Thomas listened with the complete attention he had learned the children deserved. At the school gates, Emma hugged him goodbye, no longer the clingy child who had been afraid he might disappear if she let him out of her sight. The security of their established routine had given her confidence that he would always be there when she needed him. "I love you, Thomas," she said as she did every morning. "I love you too, Emma. Have a wonderful day at school." Thomas watched her run toward her classroom, marveling at how resilient children could be. The frightened, traumatized child he had found collapsed outside Buckingham Palace had grown into a confident, happy little girl who excelled in her studies and had made close friendships with her classmates. During his lunch break at the palace, Thomas received a phone call from Sandra Mills, who had remained involved in their case as a supportive resource, rather than an oversight authority. "Thomas, I have some wonderful news. Emma's psychological evaluation results came in, and Dr. Chen wants to discuss them with you. Can you stop by the hospital after your shift today? Is everything all right? Has something changed with her condition?" "Everything is more than all right. Dr. Chen will explain, but I wanted you to know that Emma's progress has exceeded everyone's expectations. You've done a remarkable job with her." That evening, Thomas and Emma met with Dr. Chen in her office at St. Mary's Hospital, the same place where their journey together had begun nearly a year earlier. Emma sat comfortably in the chair next to Thomas, no longer the pale, frightened child who had been brought to the emergency room. "Emma has shown extraordinary resilience and healing," Dr. Chen began, addressing both of them. "Her nightmares have decreased significantly. Her anxiety levels are within normal ranges for a child who has experienced loss. And most importantly, she has formed secure, healthy attachments." She turned to Thomas specifically. "What you've accomplished together is remarkable. Emma has not only recovered from her trauma but has thrived in ways that frankly surprised all of us. The stability and love you've provided have been transformative." Emma beamed at the praise. "Does that mean I'm all better now?" "It means you're a very strong, healthy little girl who has learned to cope with difficult experiences in positive ways. You'll always miss your parents, and that's normal and healthy, but you've built a new family that makes you feel safe and loved." As they walked home from the hospital, Emma slipped her hand into Thomas's. "Thomas, do you think my mummy and Daddy would be happy that I found you?" Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Emma, I think your parents would be incredibly proud of how brave and strong you've been, and I think they would be grateful that we found each other. I used to be scared that loving you meant I was forgetting them. But Granny Rose says love doesn't work that way. She says the more love you have, the more you can give." Granny Rose is a very wise woman. They stopped at their local grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. Emma had discovered a love of cooking and insisted on helping Thomas prepare meals. As they walked through the aisles, Emma chattering about wanting to try a new pasta recipe, Thomas reflected on how completely his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a solitary man whose life was defined by duty, routine, and emotional distance. Now he was a father, worrying about school projects and planning birthday parties, learning to braid hair and reading bedtime stories. He had traded his quiet, predictable existence for the beautiful chaos of raising a child, and he had never been happier. That night, as Thomas tucked Emma into her bed surrounded by stuffed animals and books, she looked up at him with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "Thomas, I know I was really sad and scared when you first found me, but I'm glad it happened. If I hadn't gotten lost, I never would have met you, and you never would have become my dad." Thomas sat on the edge of her bed, struck by the profound truth in her words. What had seemed like a tragedy, a lost child collapsing from hunger and fear, had actually been the beginning of the greatest blessing in both their lives. "I'm glad too, Emma. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." As he turned off her bedroom light and closed her door, Thomas heard Emma whisper one final thought. "Tomorrow I'm going to tell everyone at school about how my dad is a palace guard who saves people, and how he saved me and became the best dad in the whole world." Walking to his own room, Thomas smiled at the thought of Emma's proud announcement to her classmates. He had spent years guarding a palace, protecting traditions and ceremonial duties. But the most important thing he had ever protected was sleeping peacefully down the hall, dreaming of horse riding lessons and garden projects and all the adventures that lay ahead for their family. The palace guard, who had once stood silently at attention for hours, trained never to show emotion or break protocol, had discovered that the greatest honor of his life wasn't guarding royalty. It was being called Dad by a brave little girl who had taught him that sometimes the most important duty of all is simply to love unconditionally and never give up on the people who matter most.